I remember the feeling of collectively losing our breath and then trying to figure out how to talk to our children, let alone how to process the sheer enormity for ourselves. The shock altered each and every one of us in an instant and at a molecular and psychic level. I've been pondering how we alter our hearts and minds to accommodate events such as 9/11, global sea level rise, natural and human-made disasters. How is all of this settling into our being? Some of the things have become rather ordinary, like taking off your shoes at the airports, except now I'm getting to the age where they ask you if you come in and have to. Which is like, could you please card me when I buy a bottle of wine? And then there's the electronic billboards on the highway, which they always say, and this is where I want my TED Talk screen to come down. And there's a screen, imagine if you will, a screen that's coming down and it says, if you see something, say something. I'm just going to cycle back to it. So I'm going to leave that slide up there. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about myself to help you understand the question that's hanging over everyone's heads. Whatever was she thinking when she made these? And how hard is the job of her psychiatrist? The art is coming from a wellspring of internal turmoil. So some history may help to elucidate what you're seeing on the walls. So bear with me. You can't see how many pages it is, but it's not that long. It's like 15 minutes. As a young child, I had a head of curly brown hair. It was really brown. And my grandparents and parents' friends called me Shirley Temple on the beach in Far Rockaway, Long Island. And I never quite got the connection between her tap dancing, light-spirited singing, and me. I worried a whole lot, spent most of my time in my room, out of the family fray, doing chemistry experiments. My father was a cancer researcher and clinician at Columbia University and brought home beakers and test tubes for me for blending peanut butter and jelly or shampoo and conditioner into new products, which I've seen on the shelves actually, so, in my laboratory, as well as a great deal of drawing and painting. From a young age, I learned to do what I call radar, a skill to calculate the behavior necessary to be acceptable to my family, and gain the love and connection that was sometimes only sporadically untapped. There was a strong message in our home. The next slide, please. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Does that ring any bells? That's what I have to say about that. There wasn't a place to unravel difficult thoughts, and without my realizing it, a dissonance grew inside me. I developed techniques to withdraw while appearing light, adorable, and happy. I worried throughout my teens. A parade of my father's patients became family friends, took us on vacations, and gave us gifts because of their gratitude for extended life, and then sadly they perished. I became hypochondriacal myself, fearing my own death. Art lessons were approved, perhaps to tame my gnarly moods, I admit them, and I had a regular place to put the confusion. At 15, and for about 3 months, I drew obsessively from the classroom skeleton at the Art Students League of New York. I did a painting of 2 deer carrying a human carcass on a long stick over their shoulders. At about this time, my figure drawing teacher at the league came by on his rounds and sat down next to me to chat about my drawings and proceeded to write these words on my pad. Next slide, please. Boy or girl? Question mark. On my pad. Boy or girl? Question mark. Yeah, fire out the questions. Because I had buried my puberty under flannel shirts, overalls, and boots. And he honestly didn't know which I was. It was hard to be in my skin. At the age of 23, my brother took his life. I was a sophomore in college and became numb. My parents were worried about me staying home too long, citing that going right back to school would be best. I returned after 2 weeks, promptly committing myself to art and beauty for my brother, who loved art and beauty, and who had paid me handsomely to complete some of his art projects for high school. I barely passed my academic classes. I became a ceramics major and immersed myself in the creation of excruciatingly fragile porcelain vases, carved complex fish and birds into them, then glazed and fired them. I know there's some clay people in here. You will appreciate how crazy this was. But that wasn't enough. I had to raccoon fire those vases. I was processing the trauma, I think, by traumatizing my art. You can imagine that a paper thin porcelain cup or vase would not survive being put in the broiler of your oven and then plunged into ice water, which is basically what raku is. I continually lost half of my hard work and expected to. At the same time, I was also working on symptoms of a disorder called dissociative syndrome, which in my case was manifested in sensations of being separated from my physical being, unattached and sometimes floating far above my body. It was not enjoyable. It was not like, wow, oh wow. It wasn't like that. It was scary. When I spoke, my voice felt it wasn't coming from my lips. It was difficult to travel, to connect, to feel grounded and normal. A decade later, I was able to start analysis. To this day, I wrestle with impermanence, abandonment, and loss. I want to create beauty and connection as an antidote. Making these drawings are a form of purgation or catharsis. And here are the quotes. Bringing into consciousness, the emotional reliving of a painful experience as a means of releasing anxiety and tension. I now come to prefer the notion of making room for the feelings, and making the art is helping me to make room for the feelings. The portraits, or faces, are coming to terms with living side by side with the beasts, the perseverating thoughts. The work is about reconciling opposing forces. In the work that surrounds you here, I have really let the proverbial cat out of the bag this time. The inside is not light or happy, and the outside is exhausted from maintaining the cover. This work is intimate and personal and has plumbed the depths of what it actually feels like to be in my skin. It's the most honest work that I've ever made. The drawings are full of dualities. Here are some. Bring some more to the table during questions. Male, female, abandonment, connection, beauty, ugliness, permanence, loss, agitation, serenity, panic, exhilaration, constriction, freedom, toxic, pristine, near, far, volume, flatness, natural, industrial, light, dark, apocalypse, and transcendence. A little digression. Nearly 40 years ago, I visited Israel. I took a jeep trip the length of Israel to the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. That was before it went back to the Arabs. I believe it was a 2-day journey, hotter than any of these last months in BC, over a thin, crusty terrain. A Coca-Cola never tasted so good warm. We walked an eternity to the continuation of the bleached coral terrain to shallow water. We snorkeled half a mile in the blazing sun in a foot of water, just a thin, crusted layer of water. Scraping our knees and fins on the coral crust to the edges of the earth, where the Red Sea begins. And in an unpredictable and stunning instant, the crust gave way to a different eternity, a terrifying depth of blue, then blue-black sea ahead, and a 300-foot cliff dropping precipitously into the darkness below. A mass of waving, magnificent coral fanning in the undercurrents. I mean, they were the size of people. just not the little stuff you get in the Caribbean. It was just like people just waving. And fish, color, so much color. I could not breathe for the panic and the beauty, the intensity of movement, the color and unseen depths I had never imagined. The blue began to imprint with this experience. Expanses, deep space, exhilaration, and fear became a new subtext in my work. Back in the US, I tried to paint the experience. It was impossible. It could be done. I set about teaching myself perspective, human anatomy, slowly acquiring rendering skills, which would later make this work possible. Fast forward to a few years to my marriage to an earthquake scientist who's currently in California meeting with the Chinese about earthquakes and who manages the earthquake hazard program for the government. Earthquakes, volcanoes, landslides, tsunamis are part and parcel of his day and our dinner conversation. Light stuff. So, again, the question, how do we make house and heart room for enormous natural disasters? Bill, my husband, is calm in crisis. That's why he's good at what he does, and there are a few people here who work with him. And, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong. I think that's why he's got the job. The Indonesian earthquake, Haiti, Japan, Nepal, Italy. I watch him manage the networking required to assess loss, damage, and relief efforts with Uplum. I listen in awe and set about internalizing the losses of the planet, then obsessively incorporate them into my drawings. The portraits are surrounded and knit together by terrifying or soaring deep spaces, expanses, disasters, and beauty, all boiling with the same composition, within the same composition. The faces and my connection to them are my antidote to the constantly irritating, constantly challenging, and constantly obsessive narratives. So, the title of the show is Blueprints, which are for me, my own definition, no slide needed, are plans for something to be built that is hoped to be an improvement over the current. These drawings represent 8 months of reconstruction and processing after what was a kind of a hard year. And details not necessary. And then the next question I heard up there was about the blue. Over nearly 3 years, but actually the seed was planted 40 years ago in Ras Muhammad. The blue has completely taken over my palette. It sings for me, it expresses deep space and deep water most effectively. And then I did a little Google search into the color indigo, and I thought this was kind of whimsical. A very high frequency color, physiological effects, deep sleep, hibernation, reduced metabolic activity. Psychological effects, introversion, fast thinking, creativity, retention, transcendence, spatial thinking, increased perception, and intuition. And the third chakra, someone else can explain that. So, connection is to others is a core value for me, and the portraits are begun, as I said, upstairs in our studio on Tuesday nights. And we've been working with the same models, some of them for decades. And as I'm drawing the models, I'm practicing my old coping mechanism of radar and sensing. After about 30 minutes, the model begins to take on a gaze that reveals their inner dialoguing. The tap is open, and I'm privileged to spend time making a picture of that expression. Later in my studio, I continue to develop the drawings, finding the vortex of lines that sets the drawing in motion. And then I often rotate the drawings from the position that I drew them in order to enhance the sense of disorientation, purposefully unhinging my viewer because I'm attracted to a sense of the falling or rising or just being disoriented. I think it's just sort of getting back to the dissociative, sort of separated kind of thing. I'm trying to bring you along The two formats that you see here, the scroll-like and then the quads, what I call the four in a square, are okay, so there are different ways of causing you to travel through the narrative. They're basically two experiments. The scroll is a traditional format. You have to walk to get from point A to point B. In the quad drawings, I appreciate the vortex of movement, which feels perhaps even more authentic to the feelings. So I'll take all of my drawings and lay them out all over the studio floor and twist them and turn them and try reorienting them, and until they talk to each other. One is looking after another, one is staring at us, one is staring this way or that, and just trying to set up some sort of a movement and connection and dialogue. I use pastel because it absorbs light so deeply, kind of like velour, velvet. It's just, so yummy. It reflects and refracts light off the crystalline structure of the pigment. It's just yummy. And because it's such a difficult medium to transfer, I like things that are really difficult technically. And this took me forever to figure out how to get these to go up on the wall like this. It was like climbing a mountain, figuring out how these things were going to work. But I like to be challenged. It's just, I don't know, that's part of who I am. And the monochromatic, why just one color? And it's because I love volume. I love the illusion of fullness on a two-dimensional surface, which is another duality, 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. My influences, Asian scroll paintings, tiny homes, and a little fisherman and their little tiny boats in an expansive and powerful natural landscape. The Ashcan school painters, especially Edward Hopper, Nighthawks, George Bellows, the WPA, which is the Works Project administration, 1935 to 1943, under Roosevelt's New Deal, especially the figurative artists. I am passionate about Thomas Hart Benton, the way he twists and turns the clouds and the hills, and everything is set in motion, and his heart is all over his compositions. Diego Rivera, John Sloan, the Sawyer brothers, many of these folks were teaching at the Art Students League just as I was coming in as an 11-year-old. Also the German and Austrian expressionist painters, Sheila, Kokoschka, and Soutine, for their roiling, messy, ugly paint that was an honest portrayal of their interior. There was no getting out of it, which is why I keep trying to get my work overseas, because the Germans are, they like to be like that, whatever that is. And then on the other side, on the other duality, the sublime landscape painters, Thomas Cole, the Stations of Life, not the Stations of Life, sort of the Stages of Life. Albert Bierstadt, I think the lake, what's the Bierstadt Lake?
Lucerne.
Come again?
Lucerne.
Is it Lucerne? No.
Are you thinking of the National Gallery picture?
Yeah, the one at the Corcoran, who's at the top of the stairs.
Well, that's actually a fictitious painting. Is named Mount Corcoran. Oh no, you're.
It's Corcoran Mountain.
Are you thinking of?
It's called Corcoran Mountain.
Mount Corcoran.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, there's
based on the West.
Yeah, there's no place on the planet that looks like that. But it's just like the water, you can see deeply into the soaring mountains. And then finally, Art Nouveau, which those of you who've been to my home, it's like I'm trying to turn it into like a Hector Guimard metro station. And just with the asymmetrical natural forms that I find so sort of spiritually uplifting. And finally, I would like to say, with these narrative drawings, my tectonic plates have shifted. I have survived So now I know it's okay to share. I'm exposing my difficult history and my anxious personality and my endeavor to make house room for them. I'm not expecting them to make sense to you or to everyone, but I will believe the work to be successful if they have caused you to experience fragments of your own narrative through the process of experiencing my drawings. I've exposed myself inside and out, so I feel a little bit more connected. And thank you for your ears and your heart. And then the last slide up here. If you feel something, say something.